Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the epic narrative.
Say hello to everybody around you. How you doing, everyone? How you doing? Don't you love it when there's people around you to say hi to? No, I'm guessing most of you probably listen to me alone. I wonder, where are people when they listen to me? I have heard of a number of people that I go running with on a regular basis. Two specifically have reached out and said, hey, we just finished 50 miles together, one person wrote. I thought that was hilarious. Another guy, he's like, every Monday morning, I do my training runs and I take you with me. So it's funny because that guy will actually, he'll text me because sometimes we run into glitches and we don't get online, on Monday morning. And sometimes it's my fault. Sometimes it's, software is being updated at Podbean, which is the host that sends it out to everything or whatever. There's just reasons why it's not on Monday. And he'll text me. He'll be like, hey, you're not on. But I usually get up Monday morning and check right away. Theoretically, it's on at midnight. I usually get up between 4:30 and 5 a.m. And I don't remember right away, but I often will check it. And it's not like Brian's up. See, here's the thing. Brian is up at midnight. My producer, Brian, is one of those dudes that, he'll send me a message and it'll be time-stamped at 2:15 a.m. I'm like, what in the world, dude? But that's that's his life. He runs it. It's okay. Nothing wrong with it. Just really outside of my box to be up that early, that late. I can be up that early. Actually, I got up early this morning and I'm feeling it right now. So let's get on with the show. Oh yeah, but tell me where you listen to me. Living room, cars, jogging. Anything else? Sitting, eating dinner. I don't know. Oh, all right, on with the show. Okay, this one, episode, what are we on? 13? So we're in Leviticus 17, and this is about what I would call breaking bad habits, or, bad habits have to go or something. I don't know what I'll title this yet. Maybe by the end of it, it'll come to me when I have to save it to my computer and I have to title it. But basically, these guys grew up, this whole nation has grown up in Egypt after hundreds of years of their generations being in Egypt. So they came with some baggage. Like verse 3, any Israelite who sacrifices an ox, a lamb, a goat in the camp or outside of it, instead of bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord in front of the tabernacle of the Lord, that person shall be considered guilty of bloodshed. They have shed the blood and must be cut off from the people. This is how you clean it up. Verse 7, they must no longer offer any sacrifices to the goat idols to whom they prostitute themselves. This is the lasting ordinance for them. Whoo, that was tough to get out. And for the generations to come. So you could, we'll read more, but basically this is it. There were people who were like, I don't want to wait in line at the tabernacle. I'll take my sacrifice. I'll build an altar. I'll sacrifice to God. Everything will be fine. Now, this is something that I guess at some level was normal in growing up in Egypt. You did your sacrifices wherever you wanted. And offering animals, even if they're kosher, they need to be done. It needed to be done at the tabernacle. God was not trying to develop a culture of death. He didn't want people just randomly out there killing animals. He's like, if you do that, you're going to be guilty of touching a dead animal. You're going to have to go get cleaned up from that. Even kosher animals, they can be killed for food, right? That was okay. You could kill for protection if you're being rushed, by wolves. I was almost said warthogs. I was like, Bob, they're not in the Amazon. Oh man. So yeah, you can protect yourself from wild animals. You can protect yourself. You could kill for food. That was okay. But if you did something other than that, you would be unclean if you went and touched it. If you went and gutted it. If you killed a desert coyote and then wanted to go cut his tail off to wear as a hat. I don't know. That's I know that's Davy Crockett, not the Israelites in the desert. But anyways, now in that last verse I read, verse 7, where it talks about sacrificing to the goat idol. Some of that says stray. The word stray is in there. It refers basically that these are practices that you picked up in Egypt. These are sacrifices to demons and demons behind the idols. These are things that people would do like in the fields. This was a common practice in Egypt. And often they'd be done to appease like lesser gods. Everybody knew that if you did a quick little sacrifice to an idol, like they might not be the big god, the main god of the nation, but you kind of wanted to keep all the gods kind of happy, so you'd sacrifice to a lesser god. So that mentality is still part of their everyday life. They came out of Egypt and they clearly got confronted with a really big god. But they're also thinking there's like other gods, like the goat god. You want goats to all be pregnant and give healthy births, multiple births. You do a little sacrifice to the goat god while you're out in the fields. And now a lot of them didn't plant at this point, remember, because they were moving all the time. But if you wanted whatever, it doesn't matter, Bob. You don't need to do 50 examples. They get it. So that practice in Egypt was an everyday thing. And even if they didn't participate in it, they understood what was going on. So if you needed a little rain, if you needed a little sun, if you needed a little, you needed your goats to give birth, your cows to give birth, your sheep to give birth, you would do what was necessary. Sacrifice to that god, see what happens. No harm. There was no harm. Well, these kind of practices weren't harmless. They weren't harmless because they were two demons. They were two idol, the spiritual realm behind the idols. Even though they were done quickly, it didn't cost anything. It divides your loyalty. And at some level, it kept, and I would say keep, because we're going to apply this to everyday life, right? That kind of divided loyalty keeps you enslaved to the old patterns that God's trying to break. So God wants to remind the people here of, his people. He's like, listen, there are patterns that you set up in Egypt, patterns that you watched, patterns that behaviors that you participated in that you don't see as harming anything. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap, it's no big deal. But it is a big deal because there's things going on behind there that you are not aware of. And when you divide your loyalty, you're going to lessen or dull your spiritual awareness of what I'm doing. Now, in Christianese, right, in the church world, there's lots of examples of how preachers go after this. And I'm not saying it's always healthy the way that they go after it. As a matter of fact, I often try to expose manipulation and shame and guilt. But I do think that there is spiritual realms. There are spiritual realms, and there are very evil spiritual beings who are constantly on the lookout for access points to your life. And if you're doing something that you think is harmless because you always did it, even though now you love God or everything's good. You go to you're tracking with what Jesus is doing, and you all that. We have to have some awareness that what we're doing can have consequences. And I think that's what the Lord is trying to set up here. He's trying to say, hey, listen, everything you do, you got to pay attention to. Now to bring everything to the tabernacle, right, wasn't just about connecting people to God, and a rule. It was about connecting people to a God who loves them and is good. But the requirements, the rules, the following of the step-by-step approach, it was, now we see it was also there to help break the pattern and idea that basically the God you're serving just happens to be a little more powerful than all the others that we picked up over the last several hundred years in Egypt. These are real life situations for people. It's interesting how attached we get to certain habits, even though we know it impacts our spiritual life. We know that when we do certain things, we become spiritually dull. And in being spiritually dull, we still choose to do those things, because now the duller we get, the more susceptible we are doing those things, because we see the problem even less. We see the damage it's doing to us. Like we're dulled to the damage. We just don't understand it. So I think in a lot of ways the Lord's looking at the nation going, hey, there's a lot of things here that need to be adjusted. We need to make some patterns change. And so we need to stop sacrificing to idols out in the fields. Stop building a little altar and doing a little sacrifice along the way as we travel. You need to stay focused on one God and become like him, because that's who I am. Breaking bad habits, as harmless as they may seem, they are time consuming, and they divide our focus, and they keeps us in bondage, and the behavior needs to change. There's an old saying that I've known for a while that says this: behavior change produces feeling change. And that's how it starts. In the New Testament, it comes across like this. It says, let him who steals steal no more, but rather work with his hand and give to those in need. In other words, the Lord's like, listen, you may be really good at stealing. You may be able to get in and out of someone's tent and acquire something that you want, whether to sell it elsewhere or whatever. You may be really good at it. That behavior needs to change. You need to stop doing that. But sometimes you can't just stop. You have to do something else. You have to change your behavior. And you could say, well, doing something new, like, I don't know, it's not as exciting. I don't get as much of a reward. I make better money doing the wrong things. It's kind of, when you're sacrificing to little idols, it's like, I feel better. I feel like I'm more in control. I kind of can sacrifice to who I want. I can talk to who I want. I don't like, having just one big God that is in charge of everything. I kind of like having a lot of little gods that I'm in charge of. And what the Lord's saying here is, we need to change your behavior. And eventually you'll start to feel different about it as well. And I've seen that happen in people. I've seen it happen in diet, in the way that you eat. We talked about that. Was it last week, the week before? We talked about, dietary habits, how eating clean. No, it's a couple weeks ago. Can bring about a greater spiritual awareness in our lives. Like, that's important, but it changes the behavior. It's not always, everything tastes great the first time, but over time you feel better about what you're eating, and then it does taste good. It does taste good. And I know that people like to joke about, about the taste of food, and yes, some of the healthy food does taste horrible. It's true. And it is funny when people want to eat quote, whatever, is it vegan food, but the vegan food is so packed with chemicals because they're trying to make it taste like, regular meat. It's like, well, then don't be a vegan. Just eat regular meat. Like, it's actually healthier for you to eat a good piece of meat, not chemically not chemical meat made by crushing bugs and creating protein and then building it out of a 3D printer, which I know does happen, and it's disgusting. But to get a good piece of meat, don't eat something that's quote a vegetable, but is so packed with disgusting chemicals that it's actually bad for you. Anyways, oh, Bob, you got off on something. Okay, so there's habits that need to be adjusted, and sometimes you just need to change your behavior. So the Lord's like, listen, stop. Just don't sacrifice to any other idol. If you're going to sacrifice to an idol, it has to, if you got to do an offering, bring it to the tabernacle. Don't do an offering to me out in the field. Like that's you being in control of your spiritual life. And I want you to change your behavior on how you approach God so that you gain confidence in just approaching me. And eventually we don't have to do sacrifices anymore. So many people grew up generations had grown up in Egypt, and the idols are never satisfied. You always have to sacrifice. You always have to bring more. And here God sets up an offering system that says, these are the things you can bring an offering for. And once a year, I'm going to forgive everyone so that everybody starts out fresh. And it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be easy, and we're all going to fall in love with each other. So we need to change the behavior of saying that you're in control and you're out in the field sacrificing to whomever you'd like. Religion, right, takes the behavior change and turns it into another idol. And that's what's crazy. It keeps you focused on doing right, not becoming like God. Religion will get you all kind of focused on doing the right thing. I gotta do it right. And not only gotta do the right thing, I gotta do the right thing the right way. And if I don't do the right thing the right way, then I'm gonna be lost. And if I'm lost, oh no, I may never recover. Now, the other patterns that they picked up, we see here in verse 18. Where am I? Oh, sorry, not verse. Chapter 18 and 19. We talk a lot here about immorality and sexual activities. Did they learn some bad things in Egypt? I mean, we would never, you and I, we would never fall for such shenanigans. No, because we are way smarter than those guys. Yes, I joke because I think it's funny. We fall into these patterns as well, and we have to be careful. Immorality and sexual activities. They're coming from a place of the Egyptians where there was a lot of sexual activity, deviant sexual, non-covenant sexual activities. So people that aren't married together. There was acceptable sexual activity for people who were married to each other with other people. Like there was just a lot of craziness. So not only are they coming from that place, but they're also going into a land that is filled with these same sort of patterns. The Canaanites were also known to be very sexually out there. There were one. Yeah, so there was where they were coming from, where they were going. There was sexual activity to sexual patterns that the Lord wanted to change. And I honestly, this sexual deviant stuff, I don't understand how it happens. I really don't. I know it happens, I've talked to people that have been involved in it, but in my world where I evidently was so isolated, not in a bad way, I don't think. I didn't see it. I didn't know about it. I had friends in youth ministry who, had affairs with moms of the kids or whatever, and then you read about these pastors that have, the youth pastors and family life pastors and senior pastors that are having multiple affairs and manipulating young girls and old girls and boys and worship leaders that are, sleeping with what. I'm just like, I get confused. I really, really do. And I don't mean that in a pride way. I literally have no idea how this happens. I just don't. I stayed, I've stayed faithful to my wife since the day we met. Like not met, sorry. That shouldn't be. When we started dating, it was like, that was it. She was the one. I never deviated from that. And I made it an act of my will to love her. I made it, it was easy emotionally to love her. I made it an act of my will to love her. I don't know if that protected me from it. I like to think it had something to do with, I just didn't give out any vibes, evidently, that I was interested in anything except my wife. And so I don't know. Some people, will say, I've heard them say, every man is tempted. And I think, I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird. Well, Bob's like, well, we know you are weird. It's true. I am weird. But again, if you're out there and you've had multiple sexual partners and had affairs and all that sort of thing, I hope you don't feel condemned. I'm not trying to condemn anybody. I'm just telling you, I had a weird life. But the Lord's here trying to set up a nation that is going to be different than the nation they came from and the nations that they're going into. They had, these nations had a moral, deviant, sexual behavior reputation all around the world. And it needed to change. Where do chapter 18. Sorry, I got it. My phone shut off. Chapter 18, I want to look at. Chapter 18. I went to chapter 19. Say to them, the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, I'm the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live. And you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I'm going to bring you. Interesting, right? Do not follow their practices. You must obey the Lord and be careful to follow his decrees. Keep my decrees and the laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them, and I am the Lord. No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations with them. Wait, what? Yeah, that's what was going on. And he starts listing these things out. Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. Oh, well, like the Lord had to write this down. Moses had to write this down because this was normal behavior, where they came from and where they were going. Do not have sexual relations with your father's wife. Do not have sexual relations with your sister, or your father's daughter, or your mother's daughter. In other words, so he's dealing with people that possibly were remarried. So these are also step siblings. Do not have sexual relations with your son's daughter. Do not have, or your daughter's daughter. Do not have sexual relations with the daughter of your father's. What in the world are these people doing? Do not have sexual relations with your father's sister. Do not have sexual relations with your mother's sister. Do not dishonor your father's brother by approaching his wife and have sexual relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. Do not have relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your brother's wife. Do not have sexual relations with both a woman and your daughter. Like, don't have threesomes. I mean, it just goes on and on. it honestly, you got to read. And when I read it, I think the Lord needed to make sure he got specific, because evidently the culture of sexual shenanigans was so permeated into the culture of the Israelites. There was no, like, they didn't know any of this was wrong. And if they knew it was wrong, they didn't think, I mean, they might not do it, but they didn't see it as anything that was wrong for them, that they had to avoid doing them. He talks about the traditions, right? These are ingrained customs. Let's see, I should have. All these were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became defiled. And if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it vomited out the nations that were before you. That's an interesting thing. When the Lord talks about Egypt, he talks about the fact that they did these things and defiled the land, and that's why they lost it. Right? We brought that up when we looked at Exodus early on, that it wasn't God who brought those plagues. It was the enemy. They had opened themselves up to be destroyed. And that's what I believe, that's what the Lord's referring to there. He's like, listen, sin, the wages of sin is death. You start practicing this stuff, eventually you'll die. The land will kick you out. It will, you can't survive. He's not saying any of this happens immediately. I also find it interesting that he warns them about being part of the Canaanites when everybody, come the book of Joshua, everybody's thinking we're just going to kill every woman, woman, and child in the entire, wherever they stand or sit. Like, we're just going to genocide the whole place. Why is God warning them about not participating in the practices of the Canaanites, of the land in which they're going, if he intended on wiping them all out? That was not God's plan. He was not planning to wipe out the nations. He wanted Israel. He wanted the Israelites to become an influence. He wanted them to become attractive. He wanted them to create a culture that was so radiant in a dark place that people were drawn to the light, a place of love, a place of connectivity, a place where you took care of your neighbors, a place where you spoke with God directly, a place that you weren't constantly under the foot of multiple idols, any one of whom may bring bad things to your world, where you weren't sleeping with good grief, evidently anything that moved. God wanted his people to be an attractive nation so that all nations would come to God. And I believe that's why these inferences are there, because he never intended to wipe out the nations. So when you see the word traditions, what that means is ingrained customs, things like blood sports, erotic theater, superstitions, fashion, some fashions anyways. When the Lord talks about decrees, he talks about cultural norms when he said you need to keep my decrees, he's saying this is the culture I want you to develop. This is why you obey my decrees, is because we're changing the culture, because decrees are cultural norms that you just kind of pick up when you're around people. But in Egypt and in the Canaanites, you're going to see no godly connection. They're going to be uncivilized and rude, and that will be the cultural norms. You can follow things that do not flow from the beliefs of God, and you can all, inadvertently, casually, I guess you could just start doing things that are connected to other idols in order to fit in order to not seem weird. You can connect to these cultural norms. He's like, don't get confused. Don't try and flow this stuff together. Don't celebrate their holy days. Don't disrupt or parade your non-participation in their holy days. Like, God's like, don't be prideful about the fact that you're not following their holy days, and don't be mean about it. Like, just go about your day. They'll have their own celebrations. Don't go over and celebrate the same gods. Don't do that. It'll divide your focus and your loyalty. But also don't be rude and obnoxious about the fact that you are, worshiping me. That's not healthy either. Again, would he be talking about that type of thing if he was planning on killing everybody in the promised land? And my answer is no, I don't think so. Let's see. Uncover. Chapter 18. We're still. All right. Well, okay. Yeah, sorry. So I was just kind of stuck there in verse 3, or went back to verse 3 where it says, do not follow their practices. Do not follow their traditions. And those are the traditions that we're talking about. Superstitions, fashion, erotic theater, blood sports, their holy days. Don't follow those things. In chapter 18, verse 6, it's like, no one is to approach any close relative. That word approach can also mean to uncover the nakedness. This is just a term, general term, umbrella term used for sexual activity. And basically God's like, listen, marriage is a holy covenant that I recognize. And you're to keep it safeguarded. Chastity was to be cherished. Consecrated couples were to wait for the wedding to have their sex. These practices were unique to the culture of God, to the culture of heaven. You're meant to be different. These are not made covenants of men. This is the covenant you're making with God. And I'm not saying those of you that have had multiple sexual partners or you currently are living together, I'm not saying that the love and grace of Jesus doesn't cover that. It does. The Lord's just making a point here. He's trying to change an entire nation's culture. He's like, you need to behave differently. Needs the wrong word. The principles of heaven will impact the way that you behave, and it's going to impact you in this way. These practices will be unique. Close relatives. I read all those verses. Don't have sex with any close relatives. Don't have sex with any of your kids. Kids shouldn't have. Anyways, it's just don't. Everybody just stick with your wife and your husband. That's it. Most cultures allowed for all that kind of crisscross activity. Most cultures allowed for, widows and widowers to not enjoy. Sorry. Well, in their culture. Anyways. Okay. I'm stuck on all this. I'm gonna avoid it. I'm gonna avoid it now. Let me check verse 21. All right. So, verse 20, do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. Verse 21, do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you will not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And then he goes on with more sexual relations. So he throws in this Moloch thing in kind of the middle of nowhere, seemingly, on this long list of sexual activities. So there's a lot that has gone around about Moloch. A lot of people tie it into the abortion conversations, but I just want to kind of talk through some of the stuff that I picked up. Moloch was a very prominent idol in the Canaanite culture. Okay, and immorality was very prominent part of rituals and practices of those who followed Moloch. If you were there as an outsider and you did not participate in those activities, if you didn't do something to worship Moloch, it would definitely label you. You would be you'd be in a position that would become very noticeable, and you would probably be ostracized by some, probably not all, but some. I think way back to like when the COVID shots were first coming out, and I think someone said there was like $1 trillion spent on promotion of it. It was very hard to resist that kind of advertising. And then the more people that got it, right, the more people went out and got it because all their neighbors had it. That's the kind of pressure that God's talking about here. You're going to get pressured to worship Moloch, or at least to participate in some activities around the worship of Moloch. You might not go to the temple, but you might go to a celebration. You might show up at one of their holiday parties. I'm asking you not to do that because I know what it'll start to do to you spiritually. Not that you can't come back from it, but I know it won't help you. Now, one of those practices involved children. And what it says, what verse was I on? Sacrifice to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of the Lord. Do not give. Oh, there you go. Give. So the idea of giving your child to Moloch was not always that you would throw them in a burning cauldron of molten copper or whatever was in his bowl. Giving your children often just meant the idea of dedicating them to that God. You would just give them over to that God. It didn't mean that you couldn't bring them home with you, or that they were now part of some crazed prostitution, sex trade cult that went on behind the scenes. There were those things going on behind the scenes. It just didn't necessarily mean that. It just, some would be, in order to do business with the Canaanites with certain levels of importance, you might dedicate a child to Moloch. Now, you could also pass through the fire, which is another form of a dedication ceremony in which a child would be given to a priest, and they would pass through 2 large bonfires. They would pass through it, and then they would come back with the child, return to the parents, and the parents then would do the same with the child. They would pass through the fires, and they would come back through the fires. And this could be done with your child at any age. And it spoke again of dedication to the idol, of acceptance into the culture, and obviously this would divide your loyalty to God. Now, some parents did actually sacrifice their children in the flames to show a high level of dedication. And it's pretty intense. Now, sometimes those children were from these crazy sexual relations they were having with evidently anything that moved, as we already talked about. And then it continues because God. Oh, sorry. So yeah, they might sacrifice a child. Again, not that it's acceptable, but in their head, it's like, well, I had sex with my sister, and this is our child, so we're going to dedicate it to Moloch. We're going to get rid of it. It's just sick. It's just sick. I do understand why people tie it into abortion. I understand that. I do. It is a fair picture. A lot of people do, in essence, sacrifice their child in the name of culture, in the name of being accepted, in the name of convenience. It's wow. All right. Oh, this has been a long one. We're gone 40 minutes. Okay. Let me wrap it up. Verse 21 talks about sodomy and bestiality, which evidently are, obviously they're an abomination to God because they're unnatural in their activities. These are things that the Lord's like, this is not of me. It's not that it's not done or that you're going to die if you do it. It's just not. It's not the culture that we are developing. And your sin, or the sin of those who live on the land, impacts the land and those who live on it. Now, I think sometimes way too much is made out of this with every natural disaster that goes on, every hurricane, every earthquake. There you got people that are just screaming like, this is because of the sin of sodomy. This is the sin of, abortion. This is the sin of... Like, you know what? Sin, we go back to what sin does. Sin opens up you to the enemy trying to kill you. This is not God retaliating because you hurt his feelings. This is not God saying, you behave. If you don't behave, I'm going to come down there and smack you. No, that's not God's behavior. That's the behavior of sin. That's the behavior of the enemy. God is going to love people. That's what God does. That's what we should do. God's letting his nation know, listen, I know what happens. We've seen it. You've seen it. Don't allow our nation, the one that we're just starting together, don't open it up right away. Don't open it up to what sin will do, because sin will ultimately bring it down. I'll be there with you. I'll walk with you. Not going to change my heart towards you. Not going to change my mind towards you. You guys are awesome and I love you. I'm just trying to let you know this is what happens when you start making those choices. And I'm not saying that, oh, Bob, stop. All right. You know what? We'll talk more. Trust me, there's more of this stuff coming up. As we continue, this was kind of a heavy one, a long one. My goodness gracious. This reminded me of season 1. We went so long. But it was, obviously one that covered a lot of details. And we have to remember these things were not written to bring guilt and shame on people. So if you feel guilt and shame, that's not my goal. My goal was just to walk you through and say, hey, God says, let's be different. God says his love is different. It behaves differently with people. It loves people. It cares for people. It encourages the lives and freedom of people. So let's do that with one another. Have a good day, everyone. I'll see you next week on The Epic Narrative.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
Hey, wow. A couple things I want to cover. Hey, by the way, thanks for listening. I hope, anyways, a couple things I want to cover. I'm so glad we do these Bob Thoughts because I do have these thoughts after listening. It's like, I didn't really, finish that thought, but I wanted to go back to early in there when I was talking about the spiritual realm. And I fully acknowledge that it exists, but I believe to my core that because of the finished work of Christ on the cross, and I believe it is finished. When he said that, I think it's done. So I don't have any fear of the spiritual realm because of what Christ has done. I don't have to do battle. I don't break a sweat. I'm not fearful. I know they exist, but I know that they're defeated. So no matter what, like I was and have been a part of teams of people that went after, principalities and rulers and what do they call them? Masters of this age or whatever, where they have dominion. And I believe in a lot of ways that we enthroned them there because we put our faith in their abilities. And then we take our faith in God and try and beat them down. I think it gets very confusing and incredibly distracting from people's walk with God and becoming like Christ because we focus on the enemy, and that empowers the enemy. What disempowers the enemy, I think, first and foremost for me, is laughter. When we just laugh at the plans of the enemy, when we just acknowledge that he has no power over us because of the blood of Christ, like, that to me is so disempowering. It frustrates the enemy so much. It's hilarious to me, and I love doing it. And I don't want to belittle those who go after this stuff. And they've seen. I know that they've seen some crazy stuff go on. But I also believe that part of that is the deception of the enemy. It's complicated. I don't mean to belittle it or try and cover it all in less than 5 minutes. But I just wanted you to know where that was coming from, where I come from on that. I believe it exists, but I believe it is powerless against people who understand and walk in the power that Christ gave us through his death on the cross. And I love people that don't believe that. You don't have to believe like me to listen. You don't have to believe like me. I'm not going to, end fellowship with you because you don't. It's fine. It's fine. I got a comment the other day from somebody who was like, listen, I love your podcast. I don't agree with you 100%, but that's, I love your podcast. And I was like, that's perfect. We shouldn't have to agree 100% in order to be together. So anyways, that's not all on the subject. I know that's not all on the subject. This subject is huge, and those are some more thoughts on it. The other thing. Oh, I hope I didn't come across harsh on anybody who's involved in crazy sexual activity or shenanigans, as we call it. To me, it's just there are results of all of our choices, and that's all I believe God was trying to eliminate. Was he was trying to create a new culture, and the one that they were used to was filled with shenanigans. And he was like, well, the wisdom of it was in that, you reap what you sow. If you continue to sow these kind of sexual activities, you're going to reap the fruit of that. And it's just not a unifying factor. It's not something that gives people freedom. It's not something that ultimately brings ultimate joy and hope and all that. So it's, I believe that's what he was going after. I don't believe God condemns people. I believe the enemy uses their choices and condemns them with the results of their choices. And many have suffered greatly, but God's goodness is always there. You can't do any shenanigans and lose the presence of God. You can't do anything to separate you from his goodness. So he will be good to you and continue to be good to you regardless of your choices, because that's who he is. And I want you to know that. And I believe the same thing. I believe in the goodness of his creation, and I believe the best of what he wants for each one of us, the purpose, the direction, the identity of who he created us to be is all available to us, regardless of the choices we made. We just need to make choices to now release that identity and become confident in that identity and work from that identity. And we watch the purpose and direction of God just flourish in our lives. And sometimes you end up like me and you say, what I'm currently doing is not what I know I'm designed to do, but I trust in his goodness, and we will do it. We will do it together someday. And that's where I'm at. I don't know where you're at, but I hope we see you next week here on The Epic Narrative. Thanks again for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast on any platform you use. You can also reach out to Bob for questions or booking at thebobswitzer.com or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.